A real crime. In a series of podcasts, I want you to travel down some lonely roads with me. These are the roads I traveled with families who never got to say goodbye to loved ones. These family members were fated to live the rest of their lives waiting and wondering. I will begin this series with unsolved murders, but I will also revisit cases that include arrests because aspects of the case are worth re examining. I wrote these stories when I worked as a reporter for the Charleston Gazette. Thanks for joining me today. I want to introduce you to one family that suffered two separate deaths. Lightning strikes twice for one family, episode 30. Two deaths, both murders in the minds of family members in the same family, would seem more fiction than fact. But the sister-in-law of the first victim, who's also the mother of the second victim, knows the reality of both deaths and the grief they brought. Bad judgment set the first events in motion. Joseph Hundley wanted some women to come to his house and strip for him. He lined up six $50 bills to pay them. He was still clutching those bills when his body was found. His nephew, though, wanted an evening in the great outdoors. Both men died face down, and both men could have lived if they'd been found in time. As Joseph Hundley made plans for women to come to his house to dance and take off their clothes, he negotiated with a 15-year-old, a woman who was 7 months pregnant, a woman who just turned 18, and a woman who promised to make all of the arrangements. At the time he was introduced to the would-be strippers, Hundley only had $15 in cash with him. He expressed admiration for the large-breasted 15-year-old and told her she could have his $15 for what was later referred to in court as a bra shot. She flashed and received his $15. Hundley left his house to get more cash and buy beer. He had agreed to pay each stripper $100. The strippers agreed to return to the house outside of Oak Hill in the evening. Part of the $15 was used to buy gas for the 18-year-old's car. The rest of the money went for snacks. The 15-year-old returned to her house in Beckley, where a helpful neighbor loaned her a dark pink and satin piece of lingerie she planned to wear for her opening act. She told everyone her ambition was to be a dancer. The older women had no intention of stripping. They connected with two men and formed plans to rob Hundley. One of the men said he was bringing a gun, but the women insisted from the beginning they did not want a gun involved. The party returned to the Hundley house, but the men stayed outside. Inside, the 15-year-old went into the bathroom to put on her pink outfit. She planned to emerge and begin dancing, but plans changed dramatically while she was changing in the bathroom. One of the men walked in with a gun and demanded Hundley hand over the money. Hundley refused. Everyone who knew Hundley understood that he was a dedicated bodybuilder. As a prosecutor would later say, the men had no idea how much resistance Hundley would offer. The two men, one with a gun, started beating Hundley, but he fought back. One shot was fired inside the house. The attackers began to flee, jerking the phone cord out on the way and grabbing the beer. Hundley ran out of the house, and one shot was fired outside. The women would later testify that as they drove away, they saw Hundley standing and staring at them from his neighbor's yard. But the next morning, he was found lying face down in the dirt in his neighbor's yard, still clutching the $50 bills and a piece of a chain he yanked from the neck of one of his assailants. The state medical examiner would testify that a bullet entered Hundley's back and then moved on to puncture a lung, but he might have survived if he'd gotten help immediately. 7 years later, the victim's nephew, Matthew Hundley, was planning a camping trip inside the New River Gorge National River. Matthew was days away from turning 21. Matthew had few possessions, and he'd taken the money he saved from his construction job to buy his first tent, complete with room dividers. This was the first large purchase he'd ever made. He was so proud of the tent that he wrote his name on it. An older brother and some friends went with him. They wanted to include fishing during the camping trip, but high water and flooding inside the boundaries of the New River Gorge National River changed their plans. A burst of showers drove one of the campers, Van E. White, to rush for cover. In his haste, he tore the zippered door to the tent. Hundley was upset that his brand new tent was already disfigured in its first hours of use. White, who was drinking heavily, had to leave to be at work by 7 a.m. Matthew Hundley walked White out to the parking lot when White got ready to leave. Matthew's older brother Josh would eventually testify that he could hear the two arguing. Family friend Steve Posey was part of the camping trip. Josh Hundley and Posey went looking for Matthew. They saw no one on the parking lot, and no one answered their calls. Posey would testify that he heard a sound like gravel moving and turned a vehicle's headlights on. With the headlights, he could see White crouched down in some weeds. "You got me," Posey would testify that White said to them. White then left them to go to work. The two continued to look for Matthew Hundley. They had to call for help, and a team of rescuers, including a search dog, arrived. Josh Hundley also called his mother Rose. After she arrived, she borrowed a deputy's flashlight, walked up on a nearby bridge, and shined the light into the creek and found her son. He was lying face down in the rushing water. My heart has always gone out to Rose. It was bad enough to lose her son, but to be the one to find him seems even sadder. Besides the startling discovery, Rose suffered more heartache after she read her son's autopsy report. The autopsy indicated Hundley was probably still alive when he landed face down in the water. She agonized to think if he'd gotten immediate help, he might have survived. He also sustained head and torso injuries after falling 25 feet from a bridge over a tributary of the New River. The family always believed that White threw Josh, who weighed only 115 pounds, off the bridge. When White's case came to trial, he argued Hundley fell accidentally. Rose Hundley said the sides of the bridge were too high for her son to fall accidentally. A Fayette County grand jury indicted White for murder. When the case eventually came to trial, another set of jurors found White guilty of voluntary manslaughter. After their son died, Rose Hundley said her husband David talked to investigators constantly. They did not want anyone to forget their son's death. David Hundley attended his brother's murder trial each day, but he died before his son's case came to trial. Rose Hundley believed her husband grieved himself to death at age 56. Rose also told me she often thinks of how strange it is that her family would suffer these two tragedies, 2 murders in one family, and both victims might have survived if they'd gotten help in time. Thanks for joining me. Thanks to Tommy Siner for his always great work, and to Brenda Pinnell for her technical skills. Please join me next Wednesday for a new episode of A Real Crime by Susan Williams.